The funeral flowers were still wilting on the porch when Claire slammed the legal envelope onto my grandmother's mahogany dining table. She didn't even let me remove my black coat. It was a formal notice of eviction, 30 days to clear out of the property. Claire sat there drinking expensive whiskey from grandmother's crystal decanter, wearing the diamond brooch that belonged to my mother like it was a prize she'd earned. "Your baggage from a life I'm erasing," she said, her tone sharp as broken glass. I looked at the document, then I looked at her. She thought she'd already won. She had no idea the game hadn't even started. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. To anyone watching from the outside, Claire was the devoted companion who'd cared for my grandmother, Margaret, through her final brutal 18 months. The truth was darker. She was a vulture who'd circled until the host finally died. For a year and a half, she'd methodically isolated grandmother in the master bedroom of the Rosewood Manor estate, dismissing the caregivers I'd arranged and hiring people who reported exclusively to her. She monitored phone calls, screened visitors, and controlled medication schedules. She performed the grieving caretaker role flawlessly, showing up to medical appointments in designer black while I was outside in the rain, managing the botanical gardens until my hands were raw and blistered. That was our unspoken arrangement. Claire maintained the illusion of elegance. I maintained the actual business that sustained it. I was 26 years old, a horticulturist specializing in rare orchids, and the only person on this estate who understood the difference between a Phalaenopsis and a Cattleya. While Claire was systematically draining grandmother's accounts to finance her champagne brunches and shopping trips, I was the invisible force in the greenhouse complex, monitoring humidity levels at 4 in the morning, negotiating with international buyers, and keeping the Rosewood brand prestigious. People always asked why I didn't just leave. Why, after college, didn't I walk away and let them collapse under their own dysfunction? They called me passive. They said I had no backbone. But they didn't understand the invisible rope that bound me. I didn't stay because I feared Claire. I stayed because this estate wasn't just property to me. It was legacy. It was my mother's vision in every planted bed, and my grandmother's reputation carved into the iron gates. Walking away would have meant admitting Claire owned this place, and I refused to hand her that victory. I wasn't some helpless girl trapped in a mansion. I was a protector defending something sacred. I tolerated the contempt, the dismissive comments, and the way she looked at me like I was help she couldn't quite fire, because I understood that while I remained, the gardens would endure. I'd been the quiet operator, the keeper of the legacy, waiting for the tide to shift. But staring at that eviction notice, watching her try to dispose of me before grandmother's grave marker was even installed, I understood my silence had reached its expiration date. Claire thought she was removing an obstacle. She didn't realize she was provoking someone who knew every secret buried in this estate's foundation. She wanted control of the property. Fine, but she'd forgotten something critical. I knew where every skeleton was hidden, and I knew exactly which thread to pull to unravel her entire fabricated empire. Claire didn't wait for the 30 days to pass. She started erasing grandmother immediately. The morning after delivering the eviction notice, the rumble of a heavy truck woke me at dawn. A luxury auction house vehicle was parked in the circular drive. I watched from the library window as uniformed workers removed grandmother's antique writing desk, her collection of first-edition botanical prints, and the hand-carved credenza where she'd stored decades of family documents. Claire stood in the doorway, gesturing and instructing, a mimosa in her hand before 8 in the morning. She was converting grandmother's memories into liquid assets to fund whatever came next. I walked downstairs. "What's happening?" I asked, keeping my voice level but firm. "Those items aren't yours to auction." Claire's laugh was cold and brittle. "Everything here is mine to auction, sweetheart. I'm the executor. You're just someone overstaying their welcome. I'm declaring, making space for the transformation ahead." The transformation involved converting Rosewood Manor into a commercial venue. That afternoon, a developer appeared. He was an oily man in an ill-fitting blazer who examined the gardens like they were expendable landscaping. I overheard Claire outlining her vision. She wanted to demolish the East Garden, the prize-winning orchid collection that had taken 40 years to cultivate, to construct a parking structure and event pavilion. "Flowers are so much maintenance," she complained, wrinkling her nose. "Dirt, insects, constant work. Event hosting is where real revenue lives. We'll preserve a few photogenic areas, naturally, but the rest needs to go." I felt physically sick. She wasn't just after money. She wanted to obliterate the soul of this place. She intended to gut the property's identity and replace it with a hollow shell of commercialized elegance. It was the performance of wealth by someone with nothing authentic to offer. Claire possessed no inherent value, no expertise, no connection to anything genuine, so she had to destroy what was genuine to feel relevant. She was attempting to transform decades of careful cultivation into immediate profit, because fundamentally, she knew she was empty without someone else's foundation supporting her. The house felt hollow as I walked through spaces where grandmother's presence used to resonate. I didn't protest. I didn't plead with her to reconsider. I went to my room and packed one small bag. Claire smirked when she spotted me in the hallway. "Finally accepting reality?" she asked. "Excellent. Don't forget to take your junk." I smiled back. "I'm just getting prepared, Claire. Savor this moment while it lasts." I retreated to the greenhouse. It was the only location on the estate Claire never entered. Too humid, too dirty, too filled with the labor she despised. The air carried scents of peat moss, minerals, and patience. This was my refuge. I walked past the rows of climate-controlled growing stations to the rear storage area, to a specific metal cabinet marked 1998, my birth year. Grandmother had told me since childhood that this cabinet contained something for when the weather changes. The weather had definitely changed. It was winter now, harsh and unforgiving. I opened the cabinet. Inside, nestled in protective foam, there were no orchid specimens. Instead, there was a heavy fireproof safe and a thick envelope with my name written in grandmother's distinctive script. My hands shook as I retrieved it. I sat on the concrete floor and opened the seal. "Victoria," the letter began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you're in this greenhouse, it means Claire has done exactly what I anticipated she would." I read the words, and for the first time since the funeral, I wept, not from sorrow, but from understanding. Grandmother had not been oblivious. She had witnessed everything. She wrote about the nights she'd pretended to sleep while Claire berated me. She documented the bank alerts she'd noticed but never acknowledged, tracking the funds Claire siphoned from estate accounts. She explained her silence. "I was dying, Victoria, too weak to wage a battle on multiple fronts. If I'd confronted her while alive, she would have made your existence unbearable, and she might have discovered ways to challenge the legal protections before I could fortify them. So I performed the role of the failing, confused old woman. I let her believe she was prevailing. I let her think she controlled everything. It was the most difficult thing I've ever endured, watching her treat you like staff in your own ancestral home. But I needed time. I needed to construct a fortress she couldn't penetrate." The letter outlined everything. The silence wasn't surrender. It was tactical warfare. She had been the silent guardian, enduring her own suffering to ensure that when the critical moment arrived, I would possess the weapon I required. "I'm sorry I couldn't defend you openly," she wrote, "but I have defended you legally. Inside this safe is your inheritance and your weapon. Take it to Thomas at the firm, then reclaim what's yours." I wiped away tears. They were finished. In their place was something cold and absolute. I stood, gripping the safe against my chest. Claire was upstairs, planning to pave over my heritage. She thought she ruled this estate. She didn't know the true owner had left the crown in the greenhouse. I drove directly to the law offices of Thomas and Associates, grandmother's legal team and her oldest confidants. The fireproof safe sat on the passenger seat like a silent witness. I didn't call ahead. I walked past the secretary and straight into Thomas Richardson's office. Thomas looked up from his paperwork, saw the safe in my arms, and released a long, measured breath. He didn't look shocked, he looked vindicated. He stood and locked the door. We sat in silence as I entered the combination grandmother had provided in her letter. The safe clicked open. Inside was a flash drive and a hard-bound document in blue legal binding. Thomas took the document. He adjusted his reading glasses, scanning pages he'd clearly helped prepare years earlier. "This is the irrevocable living trust," he said, his voice professional and steady. "Your grandmother transferred the entire Rosewood Manor estate, the botanical business, the brand rights, and all associated properties into a trust in your name 4 years ago. Legally, Claire has been residing in your property for 48 months. She has no legitimate claim to anything. Zero." I nodded. I'd suspected something like this. Grandmother had hinted at protections, but I'd never known the specifics. Then Thomas turned another page. "But there's more, Victoria. There's a conditional clause here. We call it a forfeiture provision. Your grandmother was terrified Claire would attempt to harm you financially the moment she passed. She wanted insurance that if Claire acted for greed, she would pay consequences." He slid the document toward me, indicating a highlighted section. It stated that Claire was entitled to a monthly living allowance drawn from estate proceeds contingent on behavioral compliance. However, the language was explicit. If Claire attempted to liquidate any estate assets, or if she attempted to evict the primary beneficiary, me, within 60 days of grandmother's death, the allowance would be immediately and permanently revoked. I stared at the words. Grandmother had weaponized Claire's impatience. She knew she couldn't be capable of waiting. She knew she'd try to auction the furniture and evict me before the funeral flowers had even died. By serving me that eviction notice yesterday, and by selling grandmother's desk this morning, Claire hadn't just been cruel, she had financially destroyed herself.
"She activated the forfeiture clause," Thomas said quietly. "She violated terms less than 48 hours after death. She receives nothing, no allowance, no settlement. She leaves with what she brought, which was nothing." I leaned back in the chair. The calculated precision of it was breathtaking. Grandmother hadn't just created protection, she had constructed a trap, and she'd waited for Claire to walk directly into it. I looked at Thomas. "She believes she's listing the estate tomorrow," I said. Thomas smiled, a sharp, predatory expression I'd never witnessed on him before. "Then I suggest we inform her she's trespassing." The following morning, exactly 24 hours after she'd served me the eviction notice, I entered the kitchen. Claire was already there, dressed in an expensive suit, meeting with a woman I recognized as a luxury real estate broker. They were laughing over coffee, discussing market valuations and staging concepts. Grandmother's chair had been removed, replaced by modern stools that clashed with the historic architecture. Claire glanced up, her smile tight and condescending. "Good morning, Victoria. This is Sandra. She's preparing the property for listing. I assume you're packing. You only have 29 days remaining." Silence was my strategy. I poured coffee, sat in grandmother's chair, pulling it back to the head of the table where it belonged. Claire's expression hardened. "Excuse me?" she said. "I'm in a business meeting." "I'm afraid your meeting is concluded," I said calmly. I slid a single document across the table. It was formal notification from Thomas Richardson's office detailing the activation of the forfeiture clause. Claire picked it up dismissively, then started reading. I watched her face transform. It was fascinating, witnessing a complete psychological collapse. First confusion, then denial, then pale, trembling recognition. The silence stretched until it became suffocating. The real estate broker looked between us, sensing the atmospheric shift. "This is fraudulent," Claire whispered. Her hands shook so violently the paper rustled. "This isn't legal. She wouldn't do this to me." "She did," I said. "She knew exactly who you were. She knew you'd try to liquidate this estate before her obituary was published. So she ensured that if you tried, you'd lose everything. The allowance, the support, the car. It's all gone, Claire. You violated the contract. You evicted yourself." She stood abruptly, knocking over her chair. "You manipulative little witch!" she screamed, her composure disintegrating. "I was her companion. I sacrificed everything. I deserve compensation." "You deserve nothing," I replied, not raising my voice. "You isolated a dying woman. You abused her granddaughter. You attempted to destroy her legacy for immediate profit. You gambled on her weakness, but you forgot to account for her intelligence." I stood. My presence filled the space like a verdict. "You gave me 30 days to vacate my own home. The trust gives you nothing, but I'm not unreasonable. I'll give you until security arrives. That's approximately 40 minutes. Claire looked at the broker desperately, searching for support, but the woman was already gathering her materials, clearly wanting no association with this disaster. Claire turned back to me, eyes wild. "I'm not leaving. You can't force this." "Actually, I can. Security is already en route to remove a trespasser. And since you just voided your own financial agreement, I suggest you pack whatever you can physically carry. Those designer bags you purchased with estate funds might be all you have left." Security arrived 12 minutes later. They didn't need force, but their presence was sufficient. Claire screamed about injustice, about her sacrifices, about how she'd given everything to a woman who betrayed her. But as she dragged her luggage down the gravel pathway, her heels sinking into the soil she'd always despised, she looked diminished. The grandeur was gone. She was just someone who'd gambled on greed and lost everything. I watched her vehicle disappear down the tree-lined drive. When the taillights faded, silence returned. But it was different now. It wasn't the tense, suffocating anxiety of constant anxiety. It was deep and clean, like air after a storm. I called the locksmith, changed every lock in the manor, and then I walked to the gardens. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the greenhouse complex. I walked to the edge of the east garden, the space Claire wanted to demolish. The soil was rich and cool beneath my boots. I could feel the life in it, the dormant energy waiting for spring. The invisible rope that had bound me to this place for so long, the fear that abandoning it would mean its death, was gone. It was replaced by different weight, the weight of ownership, the weight of responsibility. But this was weight I chose to carry. I'd brought something with me, one of grandmother's favorite orchids from the 1998 collection. I didn't keep it in the cabinet. Instead, I planted it in the exact center of the East Garden, a living memorial for the woman who'd planned everything, for my mother, who'd designed these gardens, and for grandmother, who'd protected them with her silence so they could survive the threat.
They say revenge is best served cold, but I disagree. The best justice isn't about destruction, it's about preservation. It's about standing in the ruins of someone else's greed and realizing you're holding the seeds of the future. Claire wanted to erase history to build a monument to herself. I saved history to build a future for this land. That's the power of the protector. We don't just remove the parasites, we cultivate something stronger in their place. I looked out over the estate, my estate, and breathed the cool evening air. The battle was finished. The real work was beginning, and for the first time in my life, I was ready for the season ahead. So tell me, have you ever had to remain silent to win a larger battle? Have you ever had to protect something valuable from someone who couldn't recognize its worth? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one.